Great. I just want to start off by thanking you for allowing us to interview today. We're honored to honor you as our honorees. This is, as you know, living history. We're here. Everything that we will be asking you today will go into our presentation for the Living History Awards on February 22nd. So we're going to start off with early life.
Oh yeah, I had some questions about your early life. I wanted to know specifically like how did you think you kind of like acted or like how you were as a child, like just some like habits or tendencies that might like lead to like the way you kind of like think and process the like with neuroscience specifically today.
Oh, that's a good question. I think when I was younger, I don't know if it actually relates that heavily to neuroscience, although it might. But when I was younger, I was really like shy and timid and kind of nervous. I was scared of a lot of things, like really scared of dogs and bugs, which I still am scared of bugs today. And I think maybe related to neuroscience, I think that kind of gives you a lens. If you're like introverted, you're kind of like always thinking about like what you're thinking about, what people are thinking. I think that maybe gives you a lens as like that's like an interest, like how people think and why they are the way they are. And so maybe that could explain my interest in neuroscience, because I'm super interested in like how the brain develops and how like people have individual differences and like how they are and who they are and how that's related to the brain. And so that could maybe be one way that interest developed.
Yeah. So
Does that make sense?
Yeah, like so you're saying like how the way how specifically how you act and it differs from everyone else, kind of like how the brain interacts. It's just like kind of special to you.
Yeah, kind of like what causes people to be different from each other, like in personality or like in thoughts, and like what about how your brain develops like causes this difference.
So is it like fair to say that's like one of your like initial like inspiring questions that kind of got you into this field, kind of like why like people act so different and like and how how the brain works and everybody like acts so different and how that can contrast to other people?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Another question I had. Did you have any like childhood mentors or teachers that helped like kind of got you? Like, actually, let me come back to that question.
Sure. Yeah.
What was your like favorite like subject as a kid?
I actually always really liked math,
Mm-hmm.
and language arts. Like I really liked grammar. I actually really like school, which I think is probably why I'm a professional student. But mainly I really like all subjects. I'm not super like creative, so I'm really big into like art or PE. But like, the typical like academic brainy ones like math, language.
Was there any like teachers or any mentors that helped you like those subjects anymore, or is it just kind of something you fell in love with?
I think it's something I just fell in love with. I've always had really good teachers though, which I think probably helps a ton, And I remember specifically my like 8th grade math teacher, Mrs. Weiner. It's crazy that I remember things. They're really bad memory in general, but she was great and really supportive and always talked about like her experiences and her journeys. And I think teachers that I've had like later in life have been more influential and kind of like guiding like where I like career decisions, and I think early life just kind of like got me excited about school. Those teachers did.
Yeah. Was there any other teachers like Miss Weiser that kind of stood out to you?
So it's hard because I always was in like very small classes, so I was close to all my teachers. Like my 8th grade class, there were 11 people graduating, and so like I loved like Mrs. France and Mrs. Lucky. Everybody was really great, but I think I felt like connected to Miss Weiner in like a different way.
Yeah.
Or I think we just like our personalities vibed.
Yeah.
Better, They were all great.
And did you have any like specific hobbies or interests that you did as a kid? That kind of like just like you read any books or anything like that?
Yeah. I remember I loved TV. Like I still to this day I love a good TV binge, and so I love TV. We played a lot of sports. We made a lot of dances as kids. Spending a lot of time with like my family and friends, which I still do actually today. So I think those are my hobbies.
Yeah. Is there any like specific show or something that you kind of sticks to you?
I remember we used to watch. We were Disney kids over, like Nickelodeon or something. So we would watch a lot of like Even Stevens. We watched Gilligan Island on repeat. I love repeating shows, and I think when we were younger, we did a lot of torturing my parents watching the same show over and over. I'm trying to think of other ones. I remember in high school I loved One Tree Hill and like the OC. I don't know if you guys have heard of those these days. You're kidding. Which one?
I'm not specifically sure, but I know my parents have talked about it.
Okay. Well, that's good. Fine. They were great. So, yeah.
You know what? Ooh, you still have questions?
Kind of running out right now, but I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Miles Curry, and it was kind of, it was nice hearing about your early life.
Yeah. Thanks for your questions.
I was just going to add on because I heard you talking about the brain development.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I have here was, like, are there any particular, how you say prenatal?
Prenatal. So kind of like your experiences, like when you're in utero, like when your mom is pregnant.
Right.
That's like your prenatal period.
Okay, so are there any particular prenatal factors you believe have the most significant impact on early brain development?
That's such a good question. Actually, yes. So that's kind of what I study now. And so we have I work in a research lab. It's kind of how like people do science these days.
It's called,
so,
sorry to interrupt.
No.
The Wonder Lab?
The Wonder Lab, yeah. Wow, that's perfect. And so my lab studies like pregnancy and how different experiences influence brain development of the baby. And so we have like studies. So we have like hundreds of moms in the St. Louis area that we recruit and we follow for years and follow their kids. And so we try to understand how different experiences. So we have one looking at like poverty, one looking at like cannabis use prenatally, one looking at, like stress. And so I actually think that I think most things prenatally have an effect on brain development. I think poverty is a really, really big stressor. And you can kind of think about like if imagine that you're like have a lot of disadvantage and you're like stressed or you're like working really crazy hours, you're not gonna be sleeping really well, or like your body has a lot of inflammation because you're stressed or tired or, and all of those things like change how your body is functioning and they change how your body gestates and then how, therefore, like the resources available to the baby's brain to develop and like alters how the baby's brain develops. Kind of long-winded.
Sorry, I had one more question to ask about that.
Yeah.
I'm personally really interested in biology, and I was wondering, does that kind of like relate with like external do you ever like think about that, like with external factors, how that affects someone's circumstances or like development?
Totally, yeah. My main project, my thesis project was actually trying to understand like the biological mechanism that relates like prenatal experiences to brain development. And so I'm looking at like, because when a mom is really too stressed, it's associated with a lot of like different, how the like altered brain development in the baby, you can see like at birth, and then the kids have higher incidences of like schizophrenia and like a bunch of other like neurodevelopmental disorders. And I'm trying to understand like how that trajectory unfolds. And so I think that the biological like mechanism, like the mediator, is inflammation, because stress is inflammatory, and inflammation, like the cells your body creates when you're stressed or going through an immune response, they can like travel the placenta and penetrate the baby's brain and like influence normal developmental pathways that the brain takes to develop. And so I think that is a good biological mechanism that I'm really interested in understanding. But yeah, so definitely related to biology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Teens? You have a question about teens?
So my name is Chase, and a question I had was that, were there any childhood experiences that influenced you to pursue the career you're in now?
That is a great question. Yes, I think I explored a lot of different career options, which I think I would recommend to literally anybody. Like, I think it's really important to explore before you commit to something. And so I remember initially I wanted to go into law because my mom honestly watched a lot of Law and Order SVU, and there's a bunch of like law and psychology things in there too. And so I remember I went to a law camp, and it's like I don't actually love like reading or writing or arguing, especially, so this isn't for me. And so then I kept thinking, and so related to SVU, there's a lot of kind of like psychology. We're trying to understand like the perpetrator psychology and like why they're doing what they're doing. And so I took a psychology class in high school and like really, really loved it. And everybody said I might make a good psychiatrist. And I think so. I'm nosy, I like talking to people, and it seemed fun and interesting. And so when I started college, I was a psychology major because I was like, I'm going to be a psychiatrist, and I was pre-med. And I'm sorry, I started. Can you remind the point of the main part of your question again?
If there were any childhood experiences that influenced you to pursue the career you're in now.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, I think like watching SVU with my mom a lot, I think like kind of led me to psychology. Like watching SVU coupled with like my good experiences in the psychology classes brought me there and kind of like understanding the mind and how people, like why people are different from each other. And then through exploring that kind of career pathway, I landed in neuroscience because I initially was going to be a psychiatrist. I was pre-med and a psychology major, so I was gonna like go to med school and become a psychiatrist, like, you know, like prescribe medications to people with psychiatric illnesses. And so doing that, I was like shadowing psychiatrists and I was taking all the pre-med classes and I realized like maybe this it didn't actually like bring me that much joy or passion. Although I didn't realize that until like my junior year, which is you can change majors honestly whenever you want, but people tend to change majors like freshman and sophomore year. This was the end of my junior year, so it's like a little bit late because it wasn't reflecting actively, you know, about if this is making me happy and if this is fulfilling for me. And so I realized junior year that this isn't actually, you know, what I want to be doing. And so I decided to pivot to drop the pre-med part. And so I was just going to be a psychologist and I was going to figure out what people do in a psychology career, you know? And so people told me like grad school is a really good option and you can kind of like do research and you can stay in psychology and you can practice if you want, you can be a psychologist. And so I was like, great, I'm going to pursue that. And so people told me that if you want to get into grad school, you need to join a research lab. So that was my first experience. I joined a research lab my senior year at Duke, and it was amazing. We were kind of studying like how adolescent suicide attempts like affected the parents. Was kind of the topic of the study. And so I just learned I liked the process of research through that experience. And at the same time, I was shadowing clinicians who were psychologists, if that's what I thought I wanted to be. And I just like, you know, it's not what I thought it was going to be like. And I just like, I didn't think that I would enjoy doing that for the rest of my life. And so kind of like in parallel, I was like becoming disillusioned with psychology and I was getting more into like the research side of things. As I got more into research, I was curious about, you know, like, so I graduated my senior year and I was going to get more research experience. I joined another psychology research lab and we studied kind of like, had interventions for like parents and teachers and how to like help their kids optimally develop. And so I was doing that, loved it, but I was curious about like how the brain played a role in things, or like how the brain related to like psychological like activity, you know? And I had a couple of neuro classes at Duke, but not enough to like know that I liked that as a career. And so I decided to do a master's in neuroscience to kind of, to keep exploring, like, do I like this as a career? Like, do I want to stick in this? And I loved it. And I thought this was great. And so then I took a few years to try to figure out like what I wanted to study within neuroscience. And that's how I ended up. So like through like shadowing people and looking more at psychology at the same time as exploring research, I like kind of dropped the psychology aspect and fell more in neuroscience research. And that's kind of the winding path that I took to get here.
And also during your childhood years, were there any life lessons you learned? Like major life lessons, you'd say?
Yeah. Yes. I feel like I learned, I'm really big believer in like kindness, and like kindness doesn't cost anything and that goes a long way. And you know, you never know what people are thinking or experiencing. And so it's important to treat others, you know, like how you'd want to be treated essentially. I think it's probably my biggest takeaway. And I think also, you know, it's important to like be who you are. Like I think like trends change and time changes, and at the end of the day, like you're sitting there with yourself, you know, and so I think it's important to feel like proud and comfortable with who you have been that day.